Hey there, greetings everybody. Welcome here to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. So, here we go. This is my Wednesday night favorite show, and it's a special show because it's an anniversary show, even though the anniversary was kind of last week. We're going to do the anniversary show today, and I've chosen to do my 25 favorite progressive rock albums, revised, I guess, because the original one came out a couple years ago and was well received. It's the most watched video on the channel, and so I decided to redo it to see how much has changed over that time period. But I've changed it just a little bit. Before I did, for those of you who watched it know that I did my top 15 favorite albums of all time, and then I did 10 newer albums that were big for me at that time. So now we're going to do something similar, only we're going to do our top 25 progressive rock albums, and then I'm going to give you the 10 newer albums at the end. Kind of, instead of doing honorable mentions, that's what I'm going to do. For those of you who haven't seen this or don't know what I'm doing, you can go back and watch the original episode first if you want. But I'm not going to do what I generally do with a lot of these type of videos, where I only pick one or two or maybe 3 albums per group. This time I'm doing my favorite 25, irregardless of the group. So you're going to get a lot of albums from basically four bands. 4 or 5 bands anyways, and then you'll have a few sprinklings in there amongst from other bands. So without dragging this out too long, because it's going to be long enough as it is, I'm going to do what I always do, which is give you the albums in the descending order, so it'll be, or in ascending order. So you'll have your number 25 first, 24th, 23, all the way up to number 1. So my least favorite to my most favorite. And at this level of music, there's no bad albums. All these albums I like, most of them only by a hair over the one ahead of them, and could change. I actually changed a couple around just before I started the video, because I just felt, I think this one I'd like a little bit more. So we're going to get started now, and then I'll give you the 10 other ones at the end. So the first album out of the gate is an album that was on my 10 newer albums last time and deserves to be on the regular albums now. I think it's just a fantastic album. Coming in number 25, Atom Heart Mother. Yes, it's very pastoral. A lot of people say that about this album. It's pastoral. Sounds great on headphones. It's an album I like to listen to because I always hear little things in there that I never heard before. I just really enjoy the sound of this music. I really like, especially the long version side A, I believe it is. Let me take a look here. Yeah, the Atom Heart Mother part, I really like that a lot. And but I do like the backside quite a bit too. So for me, this is an album. The first time I listened to it, I thought, is this even rock? And then I started listening to it for a while, and I began to realize that, yeah, it's rock. It's just very pastoral in its nature. So number 25, Atom Heart Mother by Pink Floyd. So number 24 is an album that I like quite a bit. It introduced me to this band, and it was actually much heavier than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be more like a Yes type thing, but it really isn't. Tab in the Ocean by Nectar. Lots of heavy stuff. This is almost, to me, it's almost like a progressive metal album. It's not, but it's got a lot of that in it. King of Twilight, which Iron Maiden, of course, covered. Great tune. Crying in the Dark, fantastic. Desolation Valley and Waves, that's great. But the opening song, Tab in the Ocean, really heavy, really good stuff. So Tab in the Ocean, number 24. Number 23 is In the Court of the Crimson King. It took me a long time to finally buy this album. It took me an even longer time to get into the band, but I've since grown to love this album. This is a great band. I'm now on the 4th album in my playlist from them. I'm doing them chronologically, so this one was the first one. Court of the Crimson King, I love that song. I Talk to the Wind and Epitaph are probably my two favorites on the album. I do like Moonchild a lot too. The only one I really didn't care for initially was 21st Century Schizoid Man, and that's because April Wine played it before, and I think that I never liked that version of it, and so I thought this would be the same, but this is a lot different, this version. So yeah, really good album. Number 22, Acquiring the Taste. I never know which way to hold this album. Acquiring the Taste from Gentle Giant. Probably the longest running album in the history of my playlist. I played it for more than a year. Such a good album. Always hearing different stuff on here. Really like The Edge of Twilight. I like the Acquiring the Taste. Wreck is probably my favorite on the album. Black Cat, really different type of kind of bluesy, weird. It's a weird song, but I really like it a lot. This is a great album from top to bottom. Was on my list of newer albums, I think, last time, but definitely deserves to make my top 25 now. So Acquiring the Taste from Gentle Giant, coming in at number 22. That album's going to end up in the top 10 someday, eventually, once it gets its ability to claim master status. So next up is an album that I only got it this year, but I didn't realize that every single track on it that I knew, that I've been playing for years, I didn't know they were all from this album. Shine On You Crazy Diamond and Shine On You Crazy Diamond Part 2. Great tracks off Wish You Were Here. Have a Cigar, I like that. Wish You Were Here, it's a great track. And then you have Welcome to the Machine, which was that track that my friend had on his answering service, which probably kind of launched a different version of Pink Floyd for me. I didn't realize at the time that it was the same Pink Floyd that did The Wall, but that's because I didn't pay much attention to Pink Floyd. I didn't really like them, but this album is such a good album, so it had to be on my list. So it's kind of new to this list, but I really like it. Okay, the next album out of the gate is Crime of the Century. Sorry, my phone decides to go off. It doesn't ring all day until I start this video. Then it goes off. It happens every time. And I know who it is, but they're going to have to wait. Okay, so this is Supertramp's Crime of the Century. Now, this is an album I did not include last time on my list, and didn't consider it for that list because I didn't really think of it as a progressive album, but I've come to think of it that way over the last year or so. You know, you got School, Crime of the Century itself, Asylum. These are all great tracks. Dreamer's probably the only song on here is not really that progressive, but this is a pretty progressive album, so it deserves to be on this list. So I'm going to call this number 20, Crime of the Century by Supertramp. Something's not right here. Oh, I'm on the wrong stack. That's what's wrong. Okay, number 19 is Tornado. This is an album that I know it gets a lot of flack from people. People find it very choppy and thin sounding and kind of discoordinated, and there's a lot of people say it was because there's a lot of infighting amongst the members, but sometimes the infighting amongst the members really produce a lot of good stuff. All you have to do is look at the Who for that. But this to me was one of the first Yes albums I bought, and I really like it a lot. Initially I liked Future Times and Rejoice and Release, and then later and Circus of Heaven. I know that's a song that a lot of people on YouTube do not like, but I happen to like it. I think it's a great song for singing. I love John Anderson. I think his vocals are fantastic. But the two big songs for me now are Arriving UFO, which has that really kind of different sounding guitar part, and On the Silent Wings of Freedom, which is definitely one of Yes's best songs of all time. So this album deserves to be on this list, and therefore it is number 19. Number 18, Wind and the Wuthering. Yes, definitely needs to be here. This is one of the first two Genesis albums I ever had, And this is a little bit quieter than the other album. Not much, but it has a lot of my favorite Genesis early stuff that I got into. Blood on the Rooftops, All in the Mouse's Night, telling the story about a mouse. Great song. One for the Vine, which is one of the classic Genesis songs, and the 11th Earl of Mar, which is one of my favorite songs to sing. And I really like the kind of dreary look to the album cover as well. It's a lone tree out in the middle of a storm. The next one up, another Genesis album, Nursery Crime, much older one from the Peter Gabriel era. I always like the kind of heads being knocked around here. This album has the Music Box and the Fountain of Salmacy, and any album that has those two songs on it has to get rated very highly. And they weren't even my favorite. Originally, Return of the Giant Hogweed, very heavy song. I really liked it a lot. Reminds me a lot of The Knife from Trespass. And Harlequin, of course, another really good song on this album. So this is a strong album. That was number 17. Number 16, I dropped it a little bit only because I've never been greatly appreciative of the production. The artwork is great on here. There's lots of really good stuff on here, but the song Aqualung was the one that kept me from being interested in Jethro Tull for so long. You got Cross-Eyed Mary, great tune, really heavy and grinding. Mother Goose, which is one of my favorite Jethro Tull songs, probably in the top 5 anyways. Wondering Aloud, yeah, another good one. My God, great tune as well. Locomotive Breath is one of those radio songs by Jethro Tull that I quite like a lot. Wind Up was probably my favorite tune on this album initially when I first got it, and I still like it a lot. Oh, somebody's alarm has gone off. I'm getting hammered here now. First the phone and now alarm clock. You know, it's always the way it is, isn't it? Okay, so that was number that was number 16. This is number 15, Drama by Yes. Okay, so this was my first ever Yes album, and I thought it was kind of quirky when I first listened to it. I didn't really like it too much. Kind of sounded kind of staticky and kind of lack of emotion, kind of a very synthetic sound to it at first. That's the way I thought of it. Now I absolutely love this album. Every track. Machine Messiah is probably the one that everybody listens to now, but not necessarily my favorite, but a pretty heavy track. Then you've got Into the Lens, which was my favorite originally on the album, and Run Through the Light. Those are the two I liked the most at the beginning. But the other two tracks, Does It Really Happen and Tempest Fugit, are probably the two I like the most. Does It Really Happen, really strong bass on this particular track, as is on Tempest Fugit. Tempest Fugit is actually pretty heavy song. This is one of the heavier Yes albums, and I quite like it for that reason. And White Car is the song that I used to sing all the time. So this is a strong album for me now. It's gained and put itself in my top 5 Yes albums now. Next up, this is from, of course, Pink Floyd. We all know this album. Many people think this is too low on the list, coming in at number 14. Should be much higher up. I'm not going to argue with you. It's a fantastic album. There isn't a bad track on this album. Considered one of the greatest albums of all time. Sold over 40 million copies. Pretty hard to argue with that. But there isn't a bad track on here. And my favorite Pink Floyd song, Time, is on here as well. I really like that song a lot. And I think it's because of the guitar. The guitar is fantastic. He's great on this album, David Gilmour. Number 13, from Jethro Tull again, Minstrels in the Gallery. Now I want to point out too that there are some Jethro Tull albums that many people would probably rank higher. Stand Up, War Machine, maybe the War Horses, I think. Can't remember what it's called. Or I can't think of it. But those albums are still new to me. I haven't really listened to them too thoroughly to really give them a ranking. But this album I've had for over 25 years now. I love this album. There isn't any tracks on here I don't like. Minstrel in the Gallery, such a classic kind of progressive, great vocal song. Cold Winds of Valhalla, another great tune. Black Satin Dancer, I really like his vocal performance on this tune. Requiem, which is good. One Duck and Nothing at All, different type of song. And Baker Street Muse is one of the great lengthy songs that Jethro Tull does, and this one is among my favorites, if not my favorite of the long songs by Tull. So Minstrels in the Gallery coming here at number 13. Okay, so back now on to the top half. Now the top half, some of you've already seen because I screwed it up a little bit earlier, but number 12 is Fragile. At one time, this would have been my favorite Yes album. It's got those 4 great tracks. All of them are great. South Side of the Sky may be the best of the underrated Yes songs. Of course, Roundabout is the staple for rock radio from Yes, probably considered their best song. Heart of the Sunrise, though, is just such a fantastic, heavier song from Yes, and one of my favorites as well. And of course, Long Distance Runaround is a great track. And then even the 5 kind of bit pieces that each member does, I still like We Are Heaven, and how can you not like Mood for the Day? It's such a great acoustic guitar bit. So there you go. Number 12, Fragile. Number 11, Foxtrot from Genesis. Any album that boasts Watchers of the Sky and Supper's Ready has got to be a top album by any standards. Supper's Ready is one of the great epic songs of all time. Yeah, just such a catchy song. Watchers of the Sky is probably, it's got to be one of my favorite Genesis songs from all time. I think it's got to be up there, top 2 or 3, I think. Horizons, nice little acoustic bit on here, classical guitar bit. And Can Utility and the Coastliners is a song that I've long thought underrated. And Timetable 2, another great tune. Get 'Em Out by Friday is a little bit of a funny, quirky song, but I like that too. So there's no bad songs on this album. Fantastic. Okay, number 10, the Yes album. Continuously moved up over the years, ever since I discovered, Starship Trooper, of course, and I've seen All Good People were the first 2 I really liked. I've seen All Good People, I've come to realize doesn't really belong here. It's a little bit too much for me. Kind of reminds me of Hey Jude. It just goes on and on and on. Starship Trooper, such a great, amazing kind of progressive rock song. Yours Is No Disgrace is probably my favorite track on here, though. It's just so catchy and bouncy, and the live video is so good too. Perpetual Change, underrated for sure. The Clap, another great acoustic bit by Steve Howe, his first with Yes. And then The Venture, it's a little bit of a weak song, but it's not terrible either. Okay, I'm just going to separate these a little bit so they don't fall over. Now we're moving up into that was number 10. So number 9, Rush's Farewell to Kings. This album was higher before. It's kind of worn out now over the years, but I still love A Farewell to Kings and Xanadu, maybe the best 1-2 combo of any album in history, 2 songs in a row like that. Cinderella Man, another one of my longtime favorite songs to sing. Cygnus X1 is the only song on here that has begun to grow with me a lot. I think it's just fantastic. And then Close to the Heart and Madrigal, however you want to say it, both okay, good songs. I like them both. Next up, another Rush album, Caress of Steel. Long underrated album. Many people think that this album was their mistake, but I don't think it is. I think it's just so good. Maybe the production isn't as good as it should be, but the songs are fantastic. Bastille Day, great kind of heavy song. The only kind of outlier is I think I'm Going Bald, which I think was if I remember correctly, they said they wrote this in answer to Gene Simmons's "I Think I'm Going Blind." It's kind of a farce, right? Lakeside Park's probably my favorite Rush song. Yeah, it's close. The Necromancer, such a eerie but descriptive song, and reminds me of my time where I grew up, because this was written in that time period and in that area where I grew up. The Fountain of Lambeth, my favorite long Rush song. I think it's fantastic. There's little bits and parts. It's got some pastoral sound to it, some real heavy sound to it, and Geddy's voice is great on this. So Caress of Steel, number 8. Number 7, Pink Floyd's Animals. This is a great track album. This is kind of the one that really put Pink Floyd in my mindset, at the top of my mindset. Dark Side of the Moon brought him in, because I bought that at a yard sale, but this one is the one that I couldn't play it enough when I first got it. I played it so much, and now here it is. It's gone from being in the newer album list because it was newer to me back then, and now it's definitely in the upper echelon of my favorite albums, Pink Floyd's Animals. Next up, Selling England by the Pound. This is a fantastic Gabriel-led Genesis album. A lot of my favorite tracks on here. Dancing in the Moonlit Night, such a great tune. I Know What I Like in Your Wardrobe, quirky but very good. First of Fifth, of course, Steve Hackett's amazing on that. The only song I don't really like is More Fool Me, which is the Phil Collins vocals. I just think it sounds more like what he's going to be when he gets going after a while. The Battle of Epping Forest, such a classic song. Cinema Show is probably my favorite Genesis song on this album. I've always liked it. The keyboard solo, fantastic. So that's number 6. Number 5, Hemispheres. Continually moving up. 5-6 years ago, this wouldn't have made my top 5 Rush albums. Now it's, according to this, it's in my top 3 Rush albums, but one of the Rush albums I didn't include, even though it has some prog on it. I think it more of it as a metal album. So this album has the second part of Cygnus X1, which was again the same thing as the first part. I didn't really like them when I first heard them, and they've grown on me substantially over the years. The backside of the album with Circumstances, Trees, and La Villa Strangato, always liked them. They've only gotten stronger. La Villa Strangiato is probably the best instrumental song, or at least my favorite instrumental song of all time. And Trees, of course, is one of my favorite Rush songs. So there you go. Hemispheres, number 5. So now we're getting down to the top 4. Genesis, Trick of the Tail, my introduction to Genesis. This put Genesis on the map, and for a long time, this and Wind and the Wuthering were the only two I had and listened to for over 20 years. I got this in the early 80s, Wind and the Wuthering shortly after, and I never got any more Genesis albums until I started playing the Gabriel era ones. But this is so good. Every song on here has been my favorite at some point or another. Dance on a Volcano is a little bit worn out, but still a great tune. Entangled and Ripples are my 2 favorite on this album now. At one time it was Dance on a Volcano, Squonk, and Robbery, Assault, and Battery, that kind of heavier tracks, I guess. But those 2 songs, Ripples and Squonk, Ripples and Entangled, such good classic Genesis stuff. This is a fantastic album. Deserves to be number 4. Probably at one point was a little bit higher, but been replaced by this one. I know many people think, how can you think this is their best album? Is this even a prog album? Yeah, I think it's a prog album. There's enough prog on here to make it a prog album, but it has a lot of heavy stuff on it, a lot of pastoral stuff, a lot of folky stuff. Like, it's got everything. But I love every track from the top to bottom, from Songs from the Wood right down to Fire at Midnight. I love them all. Jack in the Green, such a great tune. Cup of Wonder and Hunting Girl were my 2 favorite initially, but Ring Out Solstice, Bells, and Velvet Green quickly replaced them, and I really like them a lot. There isn't really a bad track on here. and it's some great flute playing as well. Number 2, long been my favorite Rush album, was my first Rush album. Rush Permanent Waves, started out the 80s right with this album. I love this album. Most of the stuff is burned out, but Spirit of Radio, Free Will, Jacob's Ladder, Different Strings, I love all those tracks. The only one that hasn't really burned out for me is Natural Science, which is probably my favorite on here now, but they've all been favorites at different point. I still think this album has enough juice to keep it up where it is for now. And number 1, maybe the greatest prog album of all time, my favorite, and my favorite of this band, Close to the Edge. Yeah, it's such an amazing album. It's got that kind of murky, foggy, Green Monster look to it too. But the 3 tracks on here are among my 5 or 10 favorite Yes songs. All 3 of them, can't really separate them by much. I guess Close to the Edge would be the best, just because that keyboard solo is amazing. There's so much on this song, was so well put together. So that's it. There's my top 25. Now I'm just going to reiterate them, and then I'm going to give you the other 10. Okay, so number 1, Close to the Edge. Number 2, Permanent Waves. Number 3, Songs from the Wood. Number 4, Genesis, Trick of the Tail. Number 5, Hemispheres by Rush. Number 6, Selling England by the Pound by Genesis. Pink Floyd's Animals, number 7. Rush's Caress of Steel, number 8. Rush's Farewell to Kings, number 9. Yes's The Yes Album, number 10. Number 10. Number 11 is Foxtrot from Genesis, and number 12 is Yes's Fragile. Now we'll do the other stack. Number 13, Minstrels in the Gallery from Jethro Tull. Number 14, Dark Side of the Moon from Pink Floyd. Number 15, Drama from Yes. Number 16, Aqualung from Jethro Tull. Number 17, Nursery Crime from Genesis. Another Genesis album, Wind in the Wuthering, for number 18. Number 19, another Yes album, Tornado. Number 20, Crime of the Century from Supertramp. Number 21, Wish You Were Here from Pink Floyd. Acquiring the Taste at number 22 from Gentle Giant. King Crimson's In the Court of the Crimson King, number 23. Number 24, Tab in the Ocean from Nectar. And number 25, Atom Heart Mother from Pink Floyd. So pretty dominated by Pink Floyd, Yes, Genesis, Rush. Understandably, those were the bands I was into when I was younger. Those albums have been around the longest, and all have had huge impacts. If I was doing a top 25 that I normally do, a lot of those albums wouldn't have made it, but I wanted to do my favorites because that's what I did the first time. Now I'm going to do the top 10 newer albums for me. Now that doesn't mean that they're new. It just means they're new to me, and I've got into them in the last year or so since I did this video. And we're going to do them the same way, from least to most favorite. So instead of doing an honorable mentions, I'm just going to do these. Okay, so number 10, Misplaced Childhood by Marillion. And I know some of you said, well, you had the script for The Jester's Tear on the last 25 favorites. Yeah, it kind of came out, it didn't quite make the top 25 this time, and it's not really going to get a mention here because of that, but this one is definitely going to be one of the ones to be reckoned with. I like it, such a good album. The next one is Planets by Eloy. Yeah, maybe I like Colors more than it, but Colors isn't as new, it wouldn't qualify for this particular part here. New means like stuff I've discovered in the last year, and that one I had already before. The next one is this album, which I really like a lot, Identity from Riverside. This is a fantastic album. So many things on here I hear that are so good. Next up, Number 7, Moon Madness from Camel. This is an album that will continue to grow, may eventually make the top 25. I could see it doing it. It's got a lot of good things about it. Its guitar is a little more subtle than a lot of the other bands, but the only thing that hurts this is the vocals aren't as good as some of the other bands. Next up, this one has the same problem with the vocals, not as good as some of the other stuff that I listen to, but still a great album, Voyage of the Acolyte by Steve Hackett. Yeah, I really like the art on this, and that song, Shadows of the Hierophant, oh my god, so good. This album is really good. It's grown on me a lot too over the last month or so. This one I like, even though a lot of the songs are very similar sounding, but it's a bit of a pounding, kind of a spacey rock album. Hawkwind's Hall of the Mountain Grill. Yeah, there's some really good stuff here, and the album cover is fantastic too. Next up is an album that's been on my play charts for a long time and is doing really well. Hinterland Warbler was my favorite for a couple weeks there. I love the art. I love the clarity of this album, the production of this album. The only thing weak on this album, I think, is the vocals are not really to my liking, but overall the music is really good. This is one of my favorite albums from this time period. Number 3, Dark Matter. Oh, so good. IQ. This may be my favorite IQ album. I really like it. I've played it a lot now. Definitely in a few years this is going to make the top 25 for certain. Next up, In the Wake of Poseidon from King Crimson. This could eventually replace In the Court of the Crimson King as my favorite of their albums, but I'm moving through their discography now, one album at a time, so maybe by the time this gets there, another one will even come up. And then this album, so good. This is almost as good as Acquiring the Taste. To me, it's different. It's heavier. It's a lot more upbeat. But there's so many different sounds, and all the songs on here are so good. Freehand, Just the Same. That Just the Same was the one that caught me on this album. So good. So Freehand from Gentle Giant, number 1 for the new albums. So we'll just do it one more time. Number 1 for the newest albums to come out. They don't quite make the top 25 yet, but they got a chance to get there next time. Freehand from Gentle Giant. In the number 2, In the Wake of Poseidon from King Crimson. Number 3, IQ's Dark Matter, great album. Number 4, Wobbler and Hinterland. So those top 4 are really easily the top 4. These next ones are all pretty good though. Hawkwind, In the Hall of the Mountain Grill. This album has potential to get in that group as well. Voyage of the Acolyte by Steve Hackett is number 6. Number 7, am I at number 7? Yeah, Moon Madness, Camel, really good album. Really like it a lot. The tracks with the vocals on it are great. Riverside ID Identity, number 8 here, just by virtue of it not being around that long, but long enough to make an impact. Number 9, Planets. It's so different that the album cover is so odd looking, but all of their albums are like that, really different. But this one I like. It's a good album. I don't know if it's as good as Colors, but it's pretty damn good. And then of course Misplaced Childhood by Marillion. And the funny part about this one is I think I may end up liking this a little bit more than Script Adjuster, but then there's a couple more that there's another one that I have that I'm getting ready to put into my playlist too that I think might even be better than them. So there you have it. Those are my top 25 favorite progressive rock albums, revised, with an additional 10 new albums that I've gotten into also as a bonus on this. And still we didn't do any kind of honorable mentions because I did that. But I hope you enjoy this video and get a chance to look at some of these albums if you haven't. And please make your comments. Did I overstate something? Do you think it was wrong to do too many from the same bands? Normally I don't do that, but because this is my absolute favorites. I wanted to do it. So please leave your comments below, hit the like button, and please subscribe. It's much appreciated. And enjoy the video. Take care. Goodbye.